The cold light of the Xilari starship bathed Elias Vaughn's face in a pale blue glow as he was dragged into the Queen's throne chamber, his hands bound by shimmering energy cuffs that hummed with alien power. Yet he stood straight, shoulders back, eyes sharp with curiosity rather than fear, which made the alien guards exchange uncertain glances, because most prisoners screamed or begged by now, especially humans. The throne itself rose like a twisted tower of dark crystal and metal, pulsing with bioluminescent veins, and upon it sat Queen Phyrexia, ruler of the Xilari dominion, her form tall and slender, adorned in armor that looked alive, her silver tendrils flowing like liquid thought, and her eyes glowing pupil-less. And Intelligence studied Elias in silence for a long, unsettling moment before she finally spoke, her voice like music through machinery, asking, "Do you know why you are still alive, human?" And Elias, not missing a beat, replied calmly, "Because you want to know what makes us different," which earned a flicker of interest in her expression, though the guards stiffened as if expecting the Queen to strike him down for his arrogance. But instead she descended from her throne with slow, graceful steps, circling him like a predator, sizing up something unfamiliar, and as she walked, she questioned him about Earth's resistance, why his people refused to surrender even after multiple colonies had fallen, and why he had willingly come to negotiate without weapons or guards, to which Elias said, "Because we believe words can end wars better than blades," and she laughed. Strange musical sound, sharp-edged and cold, saying, "Words are illusions. Power is truth." But Elias didn't flinch, instead looking around the chamber, noting the alien writings, the banners of conquests, and said, "Yet here you are, Queen of Power, speaking to me." And silence fell again, heavier this time, as though the ship itself held its breath, until Phyrexia tilted her head slightly and asked him what he feared most, to which he said, "Losing what makes us human." And her expression darkened, perhaps in confusion or perhaps in memory, for her next words were slower, more thoughtful, asking, "Is that why your kind endures emotion?" And Elias replied, "Not just emotion, choice." And for the first time Phyrexia stepped closer, close enough that he could see the faint scars beneath her shimmering armor, marks not of battle, but of something deeper, older, like cracks in a mask. And she asked him if he thought she was a monster, the great destroyer of worlds, and he looked directly into her eyes and said evenly, "Not yet," a simple answer that made her go very still. And the guards took a step forward, unsure, but she raised one delicate hand to stop them, her gaze never leaving his, and after a long pause, she turned away and walked back to her throne, saying only, "Bring him to the observatory. I want to know how humans see the stars." And as the guards hesitated, confused, she added with a whisper that echoed across the chamber, "This one is not to be harmed." And Elias, still bound but now burning with questions of his own, allowed himself a small smile, because he could see it. Now the Queen was not what the stories claimed, not entirely, and beneath all that power and fear, something inside her was searching, and for the first time since his capture, Elias knew. The game had changed, and he was no longer just a prisoner, he was a spark in the darkness. The observatory was unlike anything Elias Vaughan had ever seen, a vast chamber of transparent crystal panels suspended in space, with stars stretching endlessly in every direction. like frozen fireflies caught in a glass ocean. And there, standing with her back to him, was Queen Vyrexia, motionless, watching the stars as if waiting for them to speak, her long armor-clad figure framed by the void, glowing softly from within like something ancient and alive. And when she finally turned, Elias noticed she was not wearing her crown, only a thin circlet of silver around her head, her expression unreadable, and she asked in a voice that was quiet yet sharp, "Do you think stars feel loneliness?" Which took Elias by surprise, not because of the question, but because of the way she asked it, like someone who had stared at the sky too long and forgotten how to look away. And he answered slowly, "Maybe. Maybe they shine because they want someone to see them." And that made her pause, gaze drifting again to the void, as if she was testing the idea. And then she told him she had been alive for over 200 cycles, a lifetime extended by the biotech of the Aziluri, ruling without pause, without rest, and how over time she had begun to forget what real voices sounded like, not the voices of fear or obedience, but of truth. And Elias listened, unsure if this was another test or something more. And when she asked about Earth's history, he spoke of music, of stories passed down through firelight and song, of how humans told tales, even in the darkest times, because hope was something they had learned to plant in the soil of despair. And as he talked, she moved closer, not like a queen, but like someone starving for something unseen, asking more. What is love? What is regret? What is forgiveness? And Elias answered each one with pieces of poems, memories of war and peace, of a child placing flowers on the grave of an enemy, of a soldier saving a stranger because no one else would. And the queen listened, her expression slowly changing from cold curiosity to something gentler, harder to define. And finally she led him deeper into the ship, into a private chamber no one else had seen, where a sculpture stood half-finished, strange and beautiful, made of light metal and crystal, showing two figures, one human, one Zelari, reaching for each other across a divide. And she admitted, in a quiet tone, that she had created it long ago, before the wars, before she was forced to become what the Empire needed, and she had hidden it because emotions were weakness in the eyes of her court. And Elias, moved by what he saw, said gently, "It's not weakness, it's the beginning of something powerful." And the queen turned to him, and for the first time there was no armor in her eyes, only a raw, unspoken ache. And she asked, "Do humans believe even monsters deserve mercy?" To which Elias answered, "That depends if the monster wants to stop being one." And his voice carried no fear, only truth, and she stood there, silent, the light of the sculpture dancing across her face like stars on water. And something in her shifted, something fragile and dangerous. And then she spoke, softer than before, "You confuse me, human." And Elias said nothing, only met her gaze, and they stood like that for a long time, two beings from different worlds, locked, in a moment that neither of them could name, until finally she stepped back, called her guards, and ordered that he be returned to his quarters unharmed. And as the doors closed behind him, Elias knew the queen had started to change, not with force or fire, but with questions, and perhaps even with wonder. And as he looked out the small window of his room at the stars once more, he could not sleep, not because of fear, but because he realized that the most dangerous thing in the Zelari Empire was not its weapons or armies. It was a queen who had begun to dream of hearts. Whispers moved like shadows through the long metallic halls of the Xilari starship, and though none dared speak, loudly the words grew louder in silence. The queen had changed, they said, and a human was the reason. And as Elias Vorn sat quietly in the corner of his guest chamber, watching the distant stars through a narrow window, he could feel the tension tightening like a rope pulled from both ends. Because every day he was summoned again, and every day Queen Vyrexia asked more questions, not about Earth's weapons or human weaknesses, but about dreams, about feelings, about the kind of pain that leaves no wound, but never truly heals. And he answered her honestly, carefully, sharing stories of artists who painted during war, of children who laughed in ruined cities, of soldiers who died with pictures of family in their hands. And Vyrexia listened without blinking, as if every word was something she had never known she needed. But while her questions grew softer, the looks from her advisors grew colder, sharper, like blades waiting to be drawn. Because to them a queen who paused was a queen who hesitated, and hesitation in their minds led to weakness. And though the queen was still obeyed, rumors now followed her steps, whispers of betrayal, of softness blooming in the heart of steel, and even her own guards grew nervous, unsure whether they protected a ruler or something changing. And one evening, as Elias entered the throne chamber, he saw that the lights had dimmed, and only 2 guards stood at the far ends, unusually still, while Vyrexia stood not on her throne but beside it, holding a small crystal sphere that glowed faintly, and she told him it was a relic of her ancestors, a device used in ancient times to hold memory echoes. And she asked if humans believed that the past could be carried in objects. And he told her yes, humans kept everything, books, songs, toys, pictures, because even a small thing could hold a story worth remembering. And she looked at the orb again and said, "Then maybe I'm more human than I thought." Before placing the sphere into his hands, surprising him, and adding, "This belonged to the first ruler who dreamed of peace." And then, almost too quietly, she added, "She was murdered by her own council." And Elias felt the weight of that truth settle deep in his chest. For now he understood the real danger, not to him, but to her. And in that moment the doors behind them opened suddenly, and a tall, black-robed figure entered without permission, one of the High Council elders, face hidden behind ceremonial armor, and he ignored Elias entirely, addressing Vyrexia with sharp, metallic words, questioning her meetings with the human, her recent decisions, her reduced military movements. And Elias watched as the queen remained calm, distant. But when the elder accused her of being compromised, of letting the spark of weakness corrupt the flame of dominance, something in her voice cracked slightly as she replied, "A spark can also light the way." And though the elder said nothing more, his gaze as he left was not that of a loyal subject, but a silent threat. And after he was gone, Vyrexia turned to Elias with something like fear in her eyes, something he never thought he'd see, and she whispered, "I don't know how much longer I can hold them back." And Elias, without thinking, stepped closer and said, "Then, don't stand alone." And for the first time, she did not step away, and the moment passed like lightning in the dark, quick and charged with meaning. But outside those walls the spark was already spreading, not just in the queen's heart, but in the hearts of enemies who had waited too long for a sign of weakness. And as Elias returned to his quarters that night, escorted by new guards who didn't speak, he realized that something terrible was building, quiet but certain, and though he had come to speak of peace, he might soon have to fight for it, and not with weapons, but with truth, because when a single spark lights the dark, it is seen not only by those who hope, but by those who fear. The silence in the Queen's ship had changed. It was no longer the quiet of peace, but the silence before a storm, thick with secrets and heavy with eyes that watched from the shadows. And Elias Vaughan felt it in every hallway, every glance from the guards, every pause in conversation that lasted just a moment too long, because something was wrong deeply, dangerously wrong. And though Queen Phyrexia still called for him each day, her voice had grown more careful, her questions more pointed, as if she were trying to warn him without saying the words aloud. And one evening, when he arrived at her private chamber, she dismissed the guards, something she had never done before, and her face, usually unreadable, showed the cracks of stress. Fear and fire barely held in check, and she told Elias that the High Council no longer trusted her, that they believed she had gone soft, that her time among the humans had polluted her mind, and that a vote was being planned, one that would remove her as ruler, legally and quietly. But if that failed, there were whispers of other ways, sharper and deadlier ways, and Elias stood silent, letting the truth sink in like cold metal, because now he understood this was no longer about peace talks or diplomacy. This was survival, and not just hers, but his too, because if they took her down, he would not walk free, and maybe no human envoy ever would again. So he asked what she would do, and Phyrexia looked to the stars beyond the crystal walls and said, "I will face them on their own ground." And when he asked how, she spoke of the ancient tradition of the trial of sovereignty, a test of words, will, and legacy held in front of the full council, where a ruler could defend their right to rule, but the risk was great, because if she failed, the council's sentence was immediate and absolute. And Elias, hearing this, knew what it meant, that she was preparing for her final chance, and if she lost, she would die. And as he offered to speak on her behalf, to tell the council what she had learned, what she had shown him, she paused and said, "They won't believe you unless they fear you." And with that, she handed him a small device, a memory crystal encoded with secret data, proof of something she had been keeping hidden, her private work, a technology not yet known to the public, something powerful but non-lethal, a weapon of peace, not war, capable of stopping violence without killing. And she said, "They think peace is weakness, show them its strength." And the next day, as the council chamber filled with the tall, silent forms of the Zilari elders, their glowing eyes watching from high thrones, Elias stood before them, alone but unshaking, and began to speak, not with grand speeches or angry words, but with simple truth, telling them how their queen had chosen understanding over domination, how she had seen a path forward that did not burn worlds, and how the real strength of a leader was not in how many enemies they destroyed, but how many they never had to. And for a moment, there was silence deep and unmoving, but then one elder, face hidden by a ceremonial mask, stood and accused Elias of manipulation, of brainwashing the queen, of weakening her will with lies and tricks. And before the queen could speak, a second elder stepped forward with a blade drawn, breaking tradition, declaring the trial null and void, calling for her arrest, and everything happened at once. The guards moved, the council rose, and Elias, reacting faster than fear, activated the Queen's device, sending out a pulse of blue light that rippled through the chamber and froze all weapons in place, locking blades and stunners alike, stopping violence without pain. And for the first time, the council saw the truth, not in words, but in action, that there was another way. And the Queen, stepping beside Elias with calm fire in her voice, said, "This is the future I offer, not submission, but peace through power you do not understand." And as the council hesitated, their control shaken, the elder who had called for her removal looked into her eyes and saw something new, something that made him step back without a word, and slowly the others followed, not in agreement, but in uncertainty, which was enough for now, and the Queen declared the trial complete, her rule confirmed by tradition and the silence of the defeated. And as she and Elias left the chamber, side by side, the guards who once looked at him with suspicion now lowered their weapons in respect. But as they returned to her chambers, neither of them smiled, because they both knew the danger had only just begun, and the true enemy was not only outside but within, waiting, watching, planning again, because peace, once planted, grows slowly, and many still prefer the darkness. The starship drifted silently through space like a ghost of metal and memory, but inside, everything had changed. Queen Phyrexia had kept her throne, yes, but it no longer felt like the same seat of power, because now, for the first time in over 200 cycles, she ruled not by fear alone, but by the weight of choice, and the shift was not quiet, nor welcome by all. And Elias Vorn could feel the resistance growing like cracks beneath a painted wall, for while many of the lower officers began to show her a new kind of loyalty, others remained still and stiff, bowing with the same practiced movements, but with colder eyes, and every hallway Elias walked now felt like a test, each nod from a guard filled with silent questions. And even when Phyrexia summoned him, her voice, though softer, carried tension just under the surface, like a string stretched too tight, and she confessed that messages from other fleets were becoming delayed, that 2 distant outposts had gone silent, and that some council elders were refusing to respond at all, hiding behind protocol and formality, waiting perhaps for the right moment to strike again. And Elias listened, knowing they were in a fragile place now, a space between what had been and what could be, and the most dangerous enemy was not loud, it was patient. And he asked the Queen if she trusted anyone among her own kind, and she was quiet for a long time before answering. "Only those who have something to lose." And though she said it with calm, her eyes betrayed the weight of it. And then she told Elias that she had begun to rewrite the Star Doctrine, the ancient code that ruled the Zalari Empire for generations, one written in conquest and survival, now being reformed into something new, something dangerous to the old ways. And she asked him to help, to write from a human point of view, to bring words of heart and hope into something that could lead a cold people forward. And he agreed, though he knew the cost could be his life, because changing laws was not just political, it was spiritual to the Zalari, and any shift in doctrine risked full rebellion, so they worked in secret, long hours filled with careful lines and powerful ideas, and they created what they called the Path of Strength through Mercy, a doctrine that honored wisdom, connection, and restraint alongside power, And when the queen was ready, she called a full gathering, not just the council, but commanders, scholars, and emissaries from outer systems. A bold move that sent a message. She was no longer hiding, and as she stood before them in a chamber lined with glowing walls, Elias at her side, she began not with threats, but with a story, a human story, one he had told her, of a village destroyed in war that rebuilt itself not with vengeance, but with unity. And as her voice filled the hall, firm but emotional, the crowd listened, some confused, others wary, and then she spoke of her past, her regrets, her failures, her awakening, and she held up the new doctrine with both hands and said, "This is not surrender, it is survival through meaning." And the room rippled with whispers, some stunned, some angry, and one high general stood to speak, calling her vision a betrayal of their ancestors, warning that the outer fleets would never accept such softness. And when she asked him, "Then why are they still losing battles against humans who fight for each other, not just themselves?" The room fell silent again, and Elias stepped forward, speaking not as an enemy, but as someone who believed in what could come next. And for a moment it seemed as if something new might take hold, until a sharp explosion echoed down the corridor, and the chamber shook as alarms lit red across the walls, and the queen turned sharply, commanding reports, and within seconds they learned that an elite guard division loyal to the old code had attempted to take control of the ship's engine core, to crash it into a human colony as a symbol of returning strength. And without thinking, Virexia and Elias ran from the chamber with a small squad of loyalists, sprinting through flashing corridors and chaos until they reached the lower decks, where smoke poured from a breach in the walls and gunfire echoed through the metal like thunder. And in the heart of it stood the rebel leader, a former palace guard who once bowed before her throne, now shouting that the queen had been replaced by a human puppet, and that the empire would never kneel to weakness. And as he aimed his weapon at her, it was Elias who stepped forward, not with a weapon, but with the memory device, the same one from before, and activated its shield pulse just as the bolt fired, freezing the energy emitter and stunning everyone in the room. And in that second of disbelief, the loyal guards moved in, arresting the rebels, disarming the explosives, saving the ship by seconds. And when the smoke cleared and the silence returned, Virexia stood tall and said to all within hearing, "Let this be the last time we try to destroy what we fear." And her voice shook with something deeper than command, it shook with belief. And in the following hours, when word spread of what had happened, something shifted across the ship and beyond, not all at once, but like a tide pulling slowly at the roots of an old world. And for the first time, the throne was not just a seat of control, it was a symbol of change. And Elias knew then that Virexia was no longer just a queen by title, she was a leader reborn, a throne redefined, and though danger still lingered in the shadows, something stronger had begun to grow in its place. The great halls of the Zilari starship no longer echoed only with orders and sharp footsteps, but with careful conversations, small laughter, and the quiet hum of something new hope. And though the wounds from the rebellion were still fresh, and some corridors still bore the burn marks from weapons, the air had changed, lighter somehow, as if the ship itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would come next. And Queen Virexia, once feared and untouchable, now walked through the decks with her head held high, not out of pride, but purpose. her guards fewer, her presence more open, and beside her walked Elias Vorm, a human who had arrived as a prisoner and become something far more complex, something no law had ever defined, and many still watched him with suspicion, while others had begun to greet him with quiet nods. And in the days after the failed coup, the Queen made a new decision, one that shocked even the most loyal of her supporters. She would return to Earth, not to demand, not to threaten, but to plant a new alliance herself, face to face. No intermediaries, no fleets hovering in orbit, just words and presence. And when she told Elias, he warned her the humans might not trust her easily, that many still saw the Zelari as cold invaders. But she only smiled and said, "Then let them see something warm." And the journey to Earth was quiet, strange, full of waiting and nervous energy. And during that time, Phyrexia did something no Zelari ruler had done in centuries. She asked her engineers to build a garden, not for beauty, but as a gift, something living, grown from both Zelari and human soil samples, a shared seed. And when Elias asked her why she believed a garden mattered, she said, "Because war leaves scars, but roots can break through stone." And when they arrived above Earth, the human fleet did not open fire, but neither did they welcome her, holding their position like a wall of doubt. And so Phyrexia sent one message only, "I come not with fire, but with life." And slowly, one ship moved forward, then another, until the humans allowed her small vessel to land in a neutral zone near what was once Geneva, a city now rebuilt into the heart of Earth's Peace Council. And there, in a clear dome surrounded by leaders, soldiers, and watchers from many nations, Queen Phyrexia stood tall in her dark robes, holding in her hands a simple metal box, and inside it a seed in a glass sphere, pulsing faintly with life from two worlds. And as she spoke, the room held its breath. She did not ask for forgiveness, nor did she offer apology in the way humans might expect, but she spoke of change, of choice, of a throne redefined and a heart rediscovered. And she spoke of Elias, not as a tool, but as a friend, as a question the universe had asked, and she had dared to answer. And when she finished, she opened the box, offered the seed, and said, "Let this be the first thing we grow together." And no one moved at first, the silence so deep it almost roared, until a child part of the new peace envoy program stepped forward, took the seed, and smiled. And with that simple act, the room exhaled, the cold tension melted, and the council agreed to talks, not with papers and walls, but with shared meals, open tables. And weeks passed in slow but steady building. And though many challenges remained, one thing had changed, the fear had cracked, and where fear once lived, something else had taken root. And in the final days before her return to the stars, Phyrexia stood in the earth garden where the seed had been planted, a small green sprout now pushing up from the soil, and she said to Elias, "It is a small thing." And he replied, "So are all beginnings." And when she turned to go, she paused, looked at him with something unspoken in her eyes, and asked, "Am I still a monster human?" And Elias smiled, the kind of smile that held both sorrow and joy, and answered, "No, you're something far rarer. You're becoming." And for the first time in her long life, the queen of a star-born empire felt her face grow warm, her breath catch, not from fear or pride, but from the simple truth of a heart learning to beat not just for power, but for peace. And as she returned to the ship, to the future she had begun to shape with trembling hands, the stars above seemed closer than ever, not as weapons or prizes, but as places where gardens might grow, where words might heal, and where monsters might learn to become more than what the universe had made them.